The wild rivers of Central Africa weren't just a challenge for Hendri Coetzee, they were his obsession. He spent years in Africa's remote war-torn villages, exploring untamed waters, dodging crocodiles, outsmarting hippos, and pushing into places most people wouldn't dare to go.
The thing about life is we already know the ending, death. But the middle, that's where we get to surprise ourselves.
And in 2010, Hendri was ready to retire from the life of dangerous expeditions. That is, until a single email changed everything. It was an invitation to one last wild river adventure. What began as a dream journey into Africa's heart soon spiraled out of control, revealing just how razor-thin the line between triumph and tragedy can be. This is the story of Hendri Coetzee. I first heard of Hendri's story when I saw the film Kadoma in about 2012 at the Banff Mountain Film Festival. It's a story that's really stuck with me ever since, and I think about it a lot, especially when I'm out paddling. During the Yukon River Quest, a marathon paddling race that I did a few years ago, I hit a point of complete exhaustion after 3 grueling, exhausting days on the water. I was hallucinating from lack of sleep and non-stop paddling, and I distinctly remember telling myself, maybe trying to make myself feel better about this horrible moment where I was suffering, I said to myself, at least there aren't any crocodiles in the river, just the risk of hypothermia in the middle of summer. And I don't know why I thought of that, but it made me feel a little bit better that I didn't have to dodge crocodiles on this river trip. I just had to make it through staying awake. But the film, it was jarring not only because of the ending of the movie, but because of Hendri himself. He wasn't just another adventurer, he was deeply introspective and always questioned why he felt this need to live on the edge. Why did he choose to do these things where he just suffered so much? And as I suffered during that race, I asked myself the same thing. Why do I keep doing these things to myself? I couldn't move my hands for days after the race. They were swollen and covered in blisters. Yet months later, after I was able to walk again and move my hands, I said I would totally sign up for that race again.
2 hours to the Skinny Bridge. Woo! We did it! Now 10 kilometers to go-ish.
So what is it that drives us to suffer? Well, we're going to explore that in this video. Hendri kind of nailed it when he said this.
The soul needs to suffer, at least as strong as the need for happiness.
And I really think that's true for some of us, not for everybody, but for some of us. Hendri's memoir, The Best Day Ever, talks about his evolution from this lost young man grappling with his parents' divorce to becoming this explorer all over Africa, chasing meaning through these extreme adventures. And that reflection is what makes his story so unforgettable. Hendri Coetzee was born in South Africa and served as a medic in the South African Defense Forces. After that, he became a raft guide on the Zambezi River in 1997, a move that would set the tone for the rest of his adventurous life. He did a lot of pretty wild things in his life. He spent months in the Congolese wilderness, he completed this 3-month meditation course in Thailand, and he earned an honors degree in psychology from the University of South Africa. And he guided river descents in 11 different countries, 8 of them in Africa, and made Uganda his home base. From there, he opened up unexplored sections of the Nile, which became his personal playground and domain. And sharing these secret areas with anyone brave enough to join him was one of his greatest joys. Hendri didn't just dabble in adventure, he lived for it. And he wanted his life to matter, to be worth those risks that he constantly took. He was one person who was full aware of how risky his life was. He was inspired by explorers like Ernest Shackleton. And Hendri once said,
I want to be a true adventurer and explorer. I want to be tested to live without the safety net and find out what I'm made of. I want the freedom of the unknown.
And Africa gave Hendri plenty of chances to test himself. On one trip to Ethiopia, he and his friend Pete Meredith faced a flash flood that washed away their food supply. They were left with just a couple days of food for this 8-day journey. And then things went from bad to really bad when Pete was suddenly thrown from the raft into the water with crocodiles nearby. He quickly scrambled back into the raft and was okay, but during that trip the dangers were constant, and every decision that they made felt like a life or death decision. But Hendri thrived in those moments. For him, danger wasn't something to avoid, it was something to embrace. The Nile River isn't just the longest river in the world, it's also one of the most dangerous. It's home to two of the most fearsome animals on the planet, and I'm sure you'll agree, the Nile crocodiles and the hippos. Nile crocodiles are massive. They reach lengths of up to 6 meters or 20 feet, and they weigh in as much as 725 kilograms or 1,600 pounds. And they love lurking just below the surface, blending in seamlessly to the water so you can't see them. Once a crocodile is latched onto its prey, there's no escape, you're hooped. They're capable of dragging animals or people into a deadly death roll, which drowns their victims. And then there are the hippos, which are kind of cute when they're little babies, like Moodang, if you've seen the hippo that's taken over the internet. He's adorable, but when they grow up, they're incredibly dangerous. They look slow and docile, but they are not. They're fiercely territorial and aggressively protect their territory, and they are fast. For big, huge beasts, they can run 20 miles an hour or 32 kilometers per hour. And they kind of like hanging out in eddies or calmer water in the rivers. Crocodiles, they hang out on the riverbanks, basking in the sun, or submerging themselves in the shallow water, hiding and waiting for prey. Hendri once said,
It's the crocodiles you can't see that really scare you.
Now, I've never faced a crocodile or a hippo. Let me know if you have. I'd love to hear it in the comments below. But I have come face to face with a pretty big predator in my backyard, and that was a huge grizzly bear. There was no mistaking when I saw it the raw power that it carried. I was eventually able to scare it away, and luckily all went well. But that feeling of standing on the edge between awe and terror was fascinating. And it's something that Hendri lived with constantly on the Nile. Just imagine having that feeling of terror and awe, but mostly terror if your life is on the line, every day. And not just every day, but all day long that he's out on the river. It's gotta really mess with you psychologically. In 2004, Hendri just wanted more excitement in his life. And just like 6 years later, a single email would convince him to come out of retirement. The call of adventure to him was just irresistible. And he looked at the Nile River in awe. He didn't look at it as just being water. To him, it was art. He described this section that he wanted to do. It was about 80 kilometers or 50 miles, and he called it Nature's VIP Lounge. And it was a paradise that he just loved and returned to almost every year. But this time he wanted something bigger, and that was the full Nile River. A 6,700 kilometer or 4,100 mile journey from Lake Victoria all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. In this expedition, it wasn't just about adventure, it did have a deeper purpose. His team that he was taking partnered with CARE, an organization that raises awareness about humanitarian situations in certain regions. But there were also natural obstacles and 2 active war zones that they had to go through. And Hendri, at the time, he was only 27, and he was the youngest member of the team, but he was also the leader. So he quickly started to feel that weight of leadership. He knew that one bad decision could kill everyone. So it was a little stressful, but he accepted those stakes, saying, there's no rules, only those who succeed and those who die trying. From the start, the Nile lived up to its reputation. At Congo Falls, the river twisted through these islands, forcing the team to navigate around hippopods and lurking crocodiles.
An annoying voice tells me that I'm too close to something that can bite me in half.
As they approached the falls, a crowd gathered on a nearby bridge, and Hendri said that they were cheering for our destruction in the rapids below, which is a pretty funny image to think about, these people watching these crazy white people scatter in the rapids. And the crowd was not disappointed. Those rafts flipped so fast in the rapids that they scattered the team into what Hendri called crocodile soup. And this is the start of those crazy place names that we talked about in my last video, how all these trails and gorges and different areas have these really, really ominous names, and this story has no shortage of them. After everybody fell off into the crocodile soup, they made it to shore alive. And even on land, safety was never guaranteed. The area was home to the densest concentration of hippos in the world, and the team's only access to the water when they were camping on land was using hippo trails. I don't know if you've ever thought of hippo trails. They've never crossed my mind. But to think that there's hippo trails out there in areas that people are walking is just terrifying. So at night, when the team was camping, they had to go to the river to get some water. And one night, while out on one of those water runs, Hendri and Pete found themselves face to face with glowing eyes. There were crocodiles staring back at them. So they played rock, paper, scissors, not the crocodiles, but Hendri and Pete, to decide who would go fill those containers. And I'm not sure who won, but that's a game you definitely want to win. And as they continued downstream, those dangers didn't stop. There was pods of hippos all over the place, filling the river, and they often charged the rafts. Crocodiles were hanging out on the river or sliding silently into the water for a closer look. But one day, one crocodile stood out. Hendri quickly noticed that this crocodile was coming in for more than a look. The team screamed at the croc and slapped their paddles on the water, which I guess is a deterrent, but the massive predator was not deterred. Hendri described how it got closer and closer to them, and all of a sudden it went from complete silence to an explosion of sound. As the crocodile lunged at the raft, one paddler smacked it midair, and it fell back into the water. And luckily that scared it off. Do you imagine being on crocodile watch with your paddle there, just waiting for it to come and to smack it? Oh man, I tell you, not a lot of stories make me as panicked as this one has when I tell it. Just telling it makes me really nervous. So he just thrived in these situations where most of us would probably just curl up in a ball and cry in the corner of the raft.
The river demanded constant vigilance. There was never a moment when we could truly relax. But to me, that was part of the beauty. The world outside is nothing but a vague notion. Our main concern is day-to-day survival. Life is close to perfect.
In Sudan, they had 2 armed guards join the crew for protection, but neither of them had rafted before or even knew how to swim, which added to Hendri's mounting frustrations and stress. So that pressure of the leadership started to wear on him, and cracks began to show in the group, and they began to splinter off, and then eventually some of them just left altogether. And that experience with the interpersonal conflict made him just really want to do more solo expeditions. He really missed the simplicity of that. And after 4 grueling months, the team finally reached the Mediterranean, or what was left of the team. And for most people, this would have been the triumph of a lifetime, one of the most exciting things you've ever done. How many people can say they did the full Nile River? Not very many. But for Hendri, that accomplishment just felt hollow at the end.
I tied my identity to this whole trip, hoping it would resolve my existential angst. But ironically, it only made it worse.
A couple years later, Hendri was looking for answers and really wanted to explore the why behind his relentless drive for adventure and danger. So he went back to one of his favorite places, Murchison Falls in Uganda, a place that he loved and feared. Murchison Falls National Park is home to lions, elephants, giraffes, but it's the concentration of Nile crocodiles and aggressive hippos that make paddling there one of the most dangerous undertakings. This time, however, the stakes were different. Something about this trip stood out from all the rest. This time, he would be completely alone. Before setting off, Hendri texted his mother and said, "I love you, just in case." His friend snapped a photo of him at the put-in and said, "Just in case it's the last picture of him." Hendri later confessed that he tried to look happy and content, but he was neither of those things. And as he set off, he said,
I'm ready. Can I do this? I really hope I don't get eaten.
I love the locals' name for crocodiles. They called them flat dogs. Just a way to make them sound a little less terrifying. And after he rounded that first corner, a crocodile charged him. Hendri barely outran it and knew that this was just the beginning of his trip, and this was not off to a great start. Soon he found himself navigating this maze of hippos, and he said,
There are intense moments when I cross within meters of the hippos.
Other than trying to avoid them, his only defense was a nervous mantra that he whispered under his breath, saying,
Please don't eat me, please don't eat me.
But the dangers, they just kept coming. Another crocodile spotted him and charged, but the fast water of the rapids saved him. And at one point, another crocodile came within 15 meters or 50 feet of Hendri, half the supposed safe distance. So there's a safety tip for you in today's Adventure Gone Wrong. When in crocodile territory, make sure you're at least 30 meters or 100 feet away from them, because then you'll be safe. But this time, Hendri actually had a helmet on his kayak just for this purpose, to use it as a decoy. So he threw it near the crocodile, like away from him, and it swam over to investigate. And that allowed Hendri to make his little sneaky escape.
It's continual intensity. Never can you say, I am safe. Nowhere in the jungle are you at the top of the food chain.
The final hours of the journey were the most harrowing. Crocodiles charged him repeatedly and hippos were super close. Hendri couldn't shake the feeling that he'd pushed his luck too far.
Twice is enough. My luck is going to run out.
He even asked himself if he was ready to die.
Death is coming for us all. The more times you play, the better your chance of a fatal mistake or accident. But these moments feed my soul. Only then do I feel I have truly lived.
And he finally reached the end and survived it. But when he got there, there was no relief, no joy, no excitement.
I'm in shock from the last few hours. For a few minutes, I sit alone by the river, trying to decompress, but nothing comes. There's no sense of accomplishment.
So that journey left him questioning everything. And why? Why does he continually risk his life?
I keep looking for a reason. Reasons are important when you keep risking your life for something. Not merely as a justification for the risk, but as an important answer to life. What could be more ironic than dying when you feel most alive?
Then after that, for 2 years, Hendri lived pretty much a normal life. He was in Norway, he had a steady job as a social worker, he had a house, and even had a car, things that he hadn't had at all in his adult life. But for somebody who was used to charging through wild rapids and dodging crocodiles, this life was a little bit boring and left him restless. He just craved that raw simplicity of life where every moment mattered. By 2008, Hendri was 33 years old and returned to Uganda, the place that he loved. And then he set his sights on his next challenge, a journey so brutal it would force him to confront his limits and rediscover himself. The idea for the walk came after Hendri read Blood River, a book detailing a 6-week trek through the Congo, which the author described as hell. The Congo is the second longest river in Africa and the third largest in the world by volume. It winds through dense rainforests, remote villages, and some of the most dangerous regions on Earth. Known as the Heart of Darkness, its waters are full of crocodiles and its shores are home to beauty but also profound human struggle. For Hendri, the Congo represented this ultimate challenge, a place where survival wasn't guaranteed even for locals. So he decided to tackle the Congo himself. But first, he wanted to toughen up before taking on the Congo River. And this is his idea of toughening up. It's not just going, doing some CrossFit or climbing some stairs. It was a solo 5,000 kilometer or 3,100 mile walk along the East African coastline. It would be brutal, and he knew it, but for Hendri, that was the point. He viewed comfort as being the enemy. Do you guys feel the same way, or do you just love the comfort of your own home and never want to leave? There's some of us who do love to suffer. That resonated with me on a pretty deep level. Just this past summer, I raced 90 kilometers or 55 miles up and down mountains in the Yukon and into Alaska on my bike. I suffered so hard in this race, and I absolutely hated every second of it. My legs were burning and cramping so much that when I stopped, I just fell over. I couldn't even stand up. And during this race, for the whole time I was riding, I kept asking myself and yelling at myself, why do I keep doing this to myself? I swore that I would never do it again, that this was the last time I was going to do it, but I've been doing this race for at least 15 years, and I sign up for it almost every damn year. So why do we love to suffer? One of my friends even asked me why I keep doing the race after I complained to her about how horrible it was. And this is a difference between some people. She does not understand the need to suffer at all. Whereas I love to suffer because I feel so good after it's done. But not everybody's like that, obviously. And Hendri nailed it when he said there's something primal about it that we can't quite control. You either have it or you don't. And for Hendri, that walk was everything he wanted and expected. It was exhausting, painful, and never ending. He roasted in the hot sun, slept in ditches, and often went hungry. And he was also crossing rivers during this, which meant that he would quickly scan for crocodiles, put a knife in his mouth, and then swim through quickly. So my little bike race kind of pales in comparison when your literal life is on the line. Even if we run into grizzly bears on our races sometimes, it's nothing like what Hendri was going through every day. But he loved it, and these scary moments were the things that made the journey meaningful to him. After walking about 1,000 kilometers or 620 miles, Hendri finally hit his breaking point. He was lost, out of food, and completely exhausted. So he decided not to push forward. He accepted the limits of his journey and quit.
I got what I came for. This simple journey, though hellish, taught me more about myself than comfort ever could.
So I'm really curious to know how many of you love to suffer as well. Are you on the suffer team or the no thanks, I take my comfort team? So as we talk about suffering and pain and some of us taking it on willingly, you know what's not painful and is effortless and rewarding? Well, that's subscribing to this here channel. There's no blisters involved. There's no suffering or torture. Well, unless you look at some of the comments and the people who hate me, but they're always going to be there. But we're having fun here, and we're talking about some interesting stories that some of you really love. So hit that subscribe button down below, and if you're enjoying this, why don't you give it a like too? Or a dislike, it's up to you. So now we're in 2009, where Hendri was ready for one of his most dangerous and ambitious journeys, and that was the solo expedition on the Congo River. And this trip got off to a really frustrating start. A customs strike left him stranded for a month, just really making him annoyed. But he reminded himself,
Optimism is foolish in the Congo. Expect the worst and be happy when it's not as bad. And always remember, you didn't come here for anything easy.
And then another few months passed by before Hendri was finally able to launch his kayak into waters polluted with human waste. He felt out of shape and rusty and unprepared, and he was pretty nervous when he first set off.
It's ironic. The older I get, the more afraid I become. I should be fearless. Experience has made me a better judge of risk. But somewhere along the line, I've started to believe my luck might run out.
So here we go. There's another fun name coming up here, and this is a particularly dangerous stretch known as the Slaughterhouse. You know you want to avoid that area at all costs, so a lot of people would get on a barge that bypasses this area to get through it safely. And it's a super overcrowded barge. There's hundreds of people on it, people just like packed on top of each other like sardines. And he couldn't sit still. They'd be on this barge for weeks at a time, so he needed some escape. So he thought that at night he would have a quick paddle while the barge was docked, just to kind of keep in shape and get moving. And others warned him not to do it, but he just couldn't resist. And this warning, in particular, is one of the most terrifying things that would keep me way out of that water. Like, I wouldn't even be on the barge. I would be like so far inland. And you might be asking, why was it called the Slaughterhouse? Well, it wasn't because of the crocodiles in the river. This time, the area was rumored to be inhabited by a tribe of cannibals. But Hendri brushed off those risks. Could you imagine just being able to brush off the risk of cannibals? He'd probably seen so many crazy things in all of his travels in Africa that cannibals didn't seem that bad. It was just unreal. So one night, Hendri took out the kayak again to go for a late night paddle, and he just drifted away from the safety of the barge. The river was really quiet that night, and he could only hear the sound of his paddle going through the water. When suddenly, the stillness was shattered by these shadowy figures that he saw in the distance, and they were boats. A lot of people on a lot of boats, and they were closing in on him fast. His heart was racing, and he spun his kayak around and tried to paddle away, but realized quickly that he didn't have a chance to escape. Before he knew it, they were right on top of him. More boats suddenly started surrounding him. He was panicking, and he realized it was a local tribe who were grabbing at his kayak. He tried to push them away, but they overpowered him and tied his kayak to their boats. He yelled at them to stop and let him go, desperately trying to remember any Swahili word that might help, but they didn't care. The boats began to tow him away, and Hendri was screaming and yelling. His voice was cracking with fear, and it felt like all hope was lost until the people on the barge actually heard his cries for help. A bunch of the passengers ran out and intervened, yelling at the attackers, and the attackers were yelling back at them. Everybody was screaming, and there was this standoff in the dark for a few minutes, when eventually the attackers relented and let Hendri go. Hendri was pretty shaken up after that, obviously, and returned back to the barge. And that's when someone translated what the tribe had been yelling, and that was, "This is our white man to eat." 5 months after starting his journey, Hendri approached the final stretch of the Congo River. Ahead was the Inga Rapids, the world's biggest and most powerful rapids. Hendri said that these rapids should be impossible to kayak, but somehow they're not. He paddled toward them with this quiet thought echoing in his mind, and that was,
This could be my exit. After a great mission, my book is nearly finished and everything is in order with the ones I love. To come back from this would be as good as I could hope for. My only regret, if I didn't make it out, would be the pain I'd cause my mother.
But Hendri ran the rapids and succeeded. The Congo didn't break him, but it left him questioning how long he could keep tempting fate. In 2010, Hendri seemed ready to actually settle down in Uganda. He planned to start a business, retire from the crazy, dangerous expeditions, and embrace a quieter, normal life. But then an email arrived. It was from American paddler Ben Stooksbury, one of the world's top expedition kayakers. Ben had his sights set on Africa's most daunting river, the Congo, and wanted Hendri to guide his team. At first, Hendri was skeptical and said no. Taking somebody unfamiliar with Africa to its very heart seems ludicrous and crazy, but Ben had this ambitious plan and he was super qualified, so it kind of won Hendri over.
I decided to move my retirement plans to next year. The universe has spoken.
And the route they were taking was unlike anything ever attempted before. It was a circular journey through the Great Lakes region of Central Africa, traversing landscapes and rivers. They were going to be climbing mountains and an active volcano. And the risks were staggering, and the team knew it. American team member Chris Korbaluk described the constant conversations they had about safety, from finding clean water to the war-torn regions and to the dangerous wildlife on the river. Hendri often faced the question, why risk so much? Why did you climb that mountain? Well, because it's there. He said that felt hollow to him. For him, the truth was way deeper.
Perhaps all achievements are born out of insecurity. By doing something that no one else has and no one likely wants to do, reinforces that I am different. For a compulsive individualist, this is oxygen.
Hendri just knew that these adventures put his life at risk, but also knew choosing to do them weren't decisions made by the mind. He simply said that reason doesn't support it. And this is similar to the mountain climbers that I've covered, and I specifically think of the ones on K2. In the 2008 K2 disaster that I covered, one of the Sherpas, as he was leaving and his wife was begging him not to go because that mountain is super dangerous, he told her that, I know this isn't rational, but I have to do it. So he as well knew that it wasn't reasonable, but he had no choice. There was something pushing him to do it. Luckily, he was one of the ones who lived, so good call, but you never know. So the group got together, and Hendri insisted that they start at Murchison Falls. It would be kind of a testing ground for them before they kept going. Ben talked about their attitude going into that first paddle and said that they weren't ignorant of the danger. In fact, they were very well aware of it. But they also thought that they could mitigate the risk by being aware of where the hippos are, being quiet near crocodiles, sneaking past them, and just using all the ways that Hendri was able to successfully navigate all those rivers. And here we go. Are you ready for another fun name? When they got to the supermarket, you can just guess what that is. It was a narrow, flat section of river where the crocodiles gathered to hunt. The team, they were really well aware that this was a dangerous area. Heck, it's called a supermarket. And Ben said, well, you're basically the food in their supermarket. Hendri warned that he'd never paddled this section without a charge from a crocodile, but hopefully this would be the first time. Ben described it as the most jaw-dropping, terrifying experience of his life. And amazingly, they passed through without seeing a single crocodile. But it possibly had a downside that had ramifications for later. Ben later said that maybe that false sense of security was our downfall. By the time they reached the Congo River in the Congo, the team was really tired but determined to finish. On their final day together, Hendri greeted them with his signature phrase,
"Get ready for the best day ever."
The team paddled cautiously into what they called an extra hazardous croc zone. The river was flat and really quiet, every ripple magnified as they constantly scanned for signs of movement. They had heard about crocodile attacks in this section, but they thought that their vigilance would protect them. Ben admitted afterward that we misunderstood the real danger that existed in that river. They kept paddling cautiously, and it was sweltering hot. There was no way to escape the heat. You couldn't just jump in the river for a little refresher, but they stuck to the formation that they had been using, where Hendri was a little behind Chris and Ben, watching for any shadow or swirl in the water that might be a predator lurking below. Minutes passed, and with each stroke, they had this fragile sense of hope that they might really make it. The bridge in the next village where they were going to resupply at was just about 15 to 20 minutes away. And then it happened. A scream ripped through the air, shattering the silence. Ben and Chris whipped around just in time to see a crocodile, its head as massive as Hendri's upper body, explode from the water. It latched onto Hendri's shoulder with this terrifying precision. His kayak flipped violently as the crocodile dragged him into this deadly spin. Water was churning and frothing, and Hendri and the predator disappeared. For a moment, Chris and Ben just froze, paralyzed with fear and helplessness. Hendri's kayak stopped moving and then fell silent, and he was gone. Chris and Ben started paddling frantically, fearing another attack. Every stroke that they took felt like an eternity, and the river seemed to close in on them. They knew another attack could happen at any moment.
That paddle felt like it took forever.
Finally, after 15 agonizing minutes, they reached the bridge. Locals quickly helped them recover Hendri's boat, but there was no sign of him at all. Hendri's death left a huge void in the world of adventure, and his teammates started reflecting. Chris said,
Losing Hendri was a tragedy, but there was more to learn from how he lived than how he died.
Jimmy Chin, renowned adventurer and filmmaker, said, in the adventure world, there's a certain understanding. We choose to do what we do, and we do it intentionally. People understand their risks, and no matter what happens, even with loss, it's not like they could ever stop kayaking. Chris and Ben admitted their tolerance for risk diminished after Hendri's death, but they never gave up the rivers they loved, and Hendri wouldn't have wanted them to. For Hendri, the Congo was the culmination of everything he was looking for in life.
I will never have a greater mission than the Congo. I've tried to give up many times, but the void left behind was unbearable.
Toward the end, Hendri realized something profound. Just weeks before his death, he said,
I no longer crave wandering. For the first time, I know where home is. Whatever happens, I surrender. This is a grand adventure. Surely there can be no greater.
A month after his death, friends and family gathered at Itanda Falls in eastern Uganda to honor Hendri. They placed a wooden raft filled with flowers, prayer flags, and photos into the rapids and set it on fire. As it drifted into the heart of the river he loved, his friend Pete said,
This is the way Hendri would have wanted to go.
So that's the story of Hendri Coetzee. Let me know what you think of it in the comments below. And if you're ready for another journey into the wild and want to explore the why behind some of the suffering that I talked about that we love, some of us love, check out my video on Emma Kelty. Her story, I think, is really gripping. It's full of adventure, resilience, and pursuit of meaning in the face of extreme danger.